cognitive biases, and engaging in critical reflection. Learning objectives. By the end of this section, you will be able to label the conditions that make critical thinking possible, classify and describe the cognitive biases, and apply critical reflection strategies to resist cognitive biases. To resist the potential pitfalls of cognitive biases, we have taken some time to recognize why we fall prey to them. Now we need to understand how to resist easy, automatic, and error-prone thinking in favor of more reflective critical thinking. Critical reflection and metacognition. To promote good critical thinking, put yourself in a frame of mind that allows critical reflection. Recall from the previous section that rational thinking requires effort and takes longer. However, it will likely result in more accurate thinking and decision making. As a result, reflective thought can be a valuable tool in correcting cognitive biases. The critical aspect of critical reflection involves a willingness to be skeptical of your own beliefs, your gut reactions, and your intuitions. Additionally, the critical aspect engages in a more analytic approach to the problem or situation you are considering. You should assess the facts, consider the evidence, try to employ logic, and resist the quick, immediate, and likely conclusion you want to draw. By reflecting critically on your own thinking, you can become aware of the natural tendency for your mind to slide into mental shortcuts. This process of critical reflection is often called metacognition in the literature of pedagogy and psychology. Metacognition means thinking about thinking and involves the kind of self-awareness that engages higher order thinking skills. Cognition, or the way we typically engage with the world around us, is first order thinking, while metacognition is higher order thinking. From a metacognitive frame, we can critically assess our thought process, become skeptical of our gut reactions and intuitions, and recognize our cognitive tendencies and biases. To improve metacognition and critical reflection, we need to encourage the kind of self-aware, conscious, and effortful attention that may feel unnatural and may be tiring. To improve metacognition and critical reflection, we need to encourage the kind of self-aware, conscious, and effortful attention that may feel unnatural and may be tiring. Typical activities associated with metacognition include checking, planning, selecting, inferring, self-interrogating, interpreting an ongoing experience, and making judgments about what one does and does not know. By practicing metacognition, it also needs a large degree of humility and what's it called? Skepticism? Well, I think skepticism itself comes from humility. Or does humility itself the thing that humbles you? I don't know. By practicing metacognitive behaviors, you are preparing yourself to engage in the kind of rational abstract thought that will be required for philosophy. Good study habits, including managing your workspace, giving yourself plenty of time, and working through a checklist, can promote metacognition. Good study habits, including managing your workspace, giving yourself plenty of time, and working through a checklist, can promote metacognition. When you feel stressed out or pressed for time, you are more likely to make quick decisions that lead to error. Stress and lack of time also discourage critical reflection because they rob your brain of the resources necessary to engage in rational, attention-filled thought. By contrast, when you relax and give yourself time to think through problems, you will be clearer, more thoughtful, and less likely to rush to the first conclusion that leaps to mind. Similarly, background noise, distracting such as the birds' noises, distracting activity, and interruptions will prevent you from paying attention. You can use this checklist to try to encourage metacognition. When you study, check your work, plan ahead, select most useful material, infer from your past grades to focus on what you need to study, ask yourself how well you understand the concepts, check your weaknesses, assess whether you are following the arguments and claims you are working on. Check your work. After doing it, check your work, plan ahead, make a checklist, select the most useful material, infer from your... Sorry, that was Discord. Let me close it. Got a lot of things opened. Select the most useful material. In other words, ignore unuseful material. Infer from your past grades to focus on what you need to study. Ask yourself how well you understand the concepts. Check your weaknesses. Ask yourself how well you understand the concepts. Check your weaknesses. Assess whether you are following the arguments and claims you are working on. Let's try to memorize these points. They are 7 points. But I want to reorder them in a way that makes more sense. First, infer from... First, plan ahead. First, plan ahead. Then, stop. Stop. Plan ahead. Infer from your past grades to focus on what you need to study. Check your weaknesses. Assess whether you are following the arguments, the claims you're working on. No, select the most useful material first. Then assess whether you are following the arguments and claims you're working on. Then ask yourself how well you understand the concepts. Then check your work. So let's try to say them without looking. Plan ahead. Check your grades and choose the subject that you need to study. Check your weaknesses. Start working, and when you start working, check out whether you understand the concepts well. No, first select the most useful works, most useful material. Then start working on the material and revising whether you understand the concepts. Then check your work. There is one missing. There is one thing that I forgot. There are 7 and I have mentioned 6 things. Okay, let's look. Assess whether you are following the arguments and claims you are working on. Okay, let's repeat. Plan ahead. Grades. Weaknesses. Most useful material. Assess whether you are following the arguments. Assess whether you understand the claims. And lastly, check your work. Okay, that's good. Cognitive biases. In this section, we will examine some of the most common cognitive biases so that you can be aware of traps in thought that can lead you astray. Cognitive biases are closely related to informal fallacies. Both fallacies and biases provide examples of the ways we make errors in reasoning. Connections. See the chapter on logic and reasoning for an in-depth exploration of informal fallacies. Watch the video to orient yourself before reading the text that follows. Video Cognitive Biases 101 with Peter Bowman. Okay, one moment. Let me wear my headphones so that the desktop audio doesn't overlap with the microphone. Okay. 6 minutes.
Well, biases are one of the most interesting phenomena in evolution. And
stop talking about the evolution. Damn it. Let's play some music. Now it's too low. I think this is good enough. Biases are one of the most interesting phenomena in evolution. No, God created us this way so that we can survive. Not because we evolved, as I said in the previous section.
And I would go as far as saying there's nothing that's not a bias. I mean, we're biased to live in a certain temperature range, and we prefer sweet food over bitter food. So biases are essential. They really guide us in a broader sense, so that we don't hurt ourselves. A bias towards feeling solid ground rather than wobbling ground. The interesting thing is really not to try to do away with these biases, but to really recognize them and not to see them as something negative, and yet to really understand that they cloud our clear thinking. That goes anywhere from self-deception to uniqueness bias, that we think, and hey, I'm one of the first ones to think I'm very unique. Basically the brain evolved for us to make ourselves special, to think of us as valuable. Otherwise, we would not be able to go through the strains and the struggles and difficulties of life. So biases, in any case, negativity bias, positive bias, confirmation bias, all of these are so ingrained in us that we don't even see them. They are kind of transparent for us. So the way that I like to look at it is the more we can detect them and become aware of it, it's kind of a hide and seek. They come out of left field. And the more we can become aware of them and discover them, it's...
Now this relates well with Thaymism, which claims that we can know the truth by depending on our intuitions and common sense immediately. Let's open a new tab. Search Ibn Taymiyyah. Epistemology. Jamie Turner. Jamie Turner Philosophy, or Ibn Taymiyyah Epistemology. What happened? Why is it dark? Oh. Should we read this really quickly, just to give you an idea of what draft version? Why is it draft version? No, we don't want the draft version. How do you go back? Never mind, let's open a new tab. Return epistemology. I think he had a chapter in a book. Yes, this Ibn Taymiyyah's common sense philosophy. You don't have to download it really, but let's read the introduction and the conclusion. This is my French studies in law. I'm a law student. I'm not French, I'm Egyptian, but I'm studying in French. In the contemporary philosophy of religion, In recent decades, there has been much talk of what has been coined the epistemology of religious belief. Like many topics in the philosophy of religion, Alvin Plantinga often features prominently in the discussion. Much of Plantingian thought seems to have its roots in the intuitions of common sense philosophy championed by Thomas Reid, who died in 1796 CE. However, some of the ideas that come to contemporary expression in Plantingian thought can be seen as having a much longer history outside of exclusively Christian and European circles. It is the aim of this chapter to suggest that in fact the essence of these ideas can be found in the theological epistemology of the Damascene Islamic theologian Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah, who died in 1328 CE. I'm by the way, to clarify, I do not support at all Ibn Taymiyyah or Taymi thought. But the point is, I want to show you that Taymi thought is really built on fallacies and biases, not on rational thought. It's not really built on the common sense that Plantinga wants and Thomas Reid. We will proceed. In what follows, I will attempt to show the ways in which Ibn Taymiyyah's fitra-based epistemology, fitra means the created nature. So I have a fitra, created nature, to eat when I'm hungry. So humans have a nature, have biases as well. This nature is not necessarily correct. That's what I'm trying to say. Anticipates the later Reidian common sense philosophical approach as developed by Plantinga by over 400 years. The chapter begins with an overview of the key Reidian intuitions found in Plantingian thought, which I will suggest are anticipated by Ibn Taymiyyah. Then the chapter will proceed to outline Ibn Taymiyyah's epistemology before moving on to make the comparisons and overlaps more explicit. I really dislike Ibn Taymiyyah. Why? Because he has been very, very aggressive in his speech. If Ibn Taymiyyah, it's not because I disagree with Ibn Taymiyyah that I dislike Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah lies, tricks, deludes, and hides the truth. That's what makes me annoyed by Ibn Taymiyyah. Unlike Ibn Sina, for example, Avicenna has different theology. Yet I don't hate Ibn Sina. The Mu'tazilis have a different theology, but I don't hate them. Because they never attacked us in how do I say it? What's it called? The way where you delude people in a trickster way. In see the synonyms to delude. Delude synonym. Deceive in a deceitful way. He's deceitful. That's what I hate about him. Conclusion. In sum, Ibn Taymiyyah makes reference to an epistemic concept, fitra, which acts as the focal point of his epistemic and philosophical system, playing a pivotal methodological role in systemizing a coherent worldview. In Ibn Taymiyyah's view, the problem with Ibn Taymiyyah is that he believes that God is physical. So he has launched a campaign against rational thought, which concludes that God is not physical, that God is immaterial and incorporeal. So Ibn Taymiyyah, instead of resorting to his rational argument that God can be or must be or is corporeal, material, or physical explicitly, he has resorted to saying that it is common sense and it is fitra, and Islam is fitra. There is a hadith that says I'm not sure whether it's a hadith or a verse, but I think it's a verse, that Islam is the religion of fitra, or at least this is a common adage. So it is the religion of the natural disposition, the natural primordial nature of humans. What does this mean? Does this mean that we are already Muslims at birth? Or does it mean this is what Ibn Taymiyyah believes? What we believe is that we are not born Muslims. We are born empty. To a large degree, not completely, of course. We have biases, we have certain, you could say, natural knowledge that atheists would, or evolutionists would consider have developed from evolution. This intuition, or what's it called? Instincts. So these instincts or intuitions and biases and heuristics that we have, Ibn Taymiyyah considered them to be arguments. Now, intuition and instinct can work sometimes, but it must be analyzed systematically like we do in logic. Anyway, I just wanted to show you that Taymi thought, the thought of Ibn Taymiyyah and his followers, is dependent on what we call cognitive biases.
It's actually quite amusing how we twist reality in a way that confirms our particular view of the world. And so I don't see them as something that's obstructing a healthy, good, positive life. But it narrows the window, and the more we become aware of them, the broader we can approach and the closer we can get to reality. Well, confirmation bias is probably one of the most pronounced biases that we have. And anybody who has ever bought a car and thought for a while about what kind of car they want to buy, they probably notice suddenly, oh yeah, there's that car again. And suddenly the brain kind of detects in the environment something that confirms like, oh yes, that seems like a really good car. So confirmation bias is really a way for us to reaffirm our view of the world. And to some degree, it's actually essential. If we didn't have some kind of confirmation bias, we would be lost. We could not piece together a world that is coherent for us. So we have to ignore certain things and other things become a little louder. And confirmation bias is different in different cultures. You know, for some cultures, a big, broad-shouldered person is very attractive, and in others, it's a very elegant person or a very lively person. And and I come from Germany, so in Germany, the confirmation bias is towards don't make a mistake. You know, get everything proper in order and get it right. So confirmation bias is really essential, and yet it's really valuable to recognize that what we perceive and how we view it is completely twisted by our internal biases. I believe the value in becoming aware of biases is that it gives you the opportunity of having a little larger perspective. The danger of not being aware of it, that we think we are right. So the value in understanding confirmation biases is that when we're in some kind of discussion or when we go into a different culture, that we recognize, the world looks different for other people. And it's not that mine is right or better or theirs is right or better. And I cannot really force them to see it my way, and they cannot force me to see it their way. So recognizing that confirmation bias is completely ingrained allows us to chuckle sometimes, when we kind of insist on a particular way of seeing the world, whether it's politically or whether it's social.
The best way to challenge your confirmation bias is to try to refute what you believe. If you can't refute it, then it's correct. If you can refute it, then it's wrong. So, and modify it then.
It's very important. It allows us to actually listen to other people better. And
that doesn't mean that you should abandon it right away. You might be also falling short, or what's it called? Falling short, yeah. You might be falling short. So give it time. Give it a chance before taking decisions, large, important decisions about your beliefs.
Drop the confirmation.
That's why tradition is there. Tradition is not, and confirmation bias is there. Or else we would be confused all the time.
Bias, maybe for a moment. There's not any particular bias that I would recognize as more important than the other, but I do find the uniqueness bias especially amusing, that we consider ourselves to be unique. And the reason I believe that we have a uniqueness bias is that we're the only person that we're with 24 hours a day. So we have far more information about ourselves, about our bodies, about our history, about our capacities. So it takes up much, much more space in our inner universe, so to say. And because we have so much more detail about ourselves and our own lives, it looms much larger than anybody else. So the interesting thing about uniqueness bias is that it's not just about ourselves, but there are circles of uniqueness. For instance, we consider our person that we have a relationship with as more unique than other people. because we know more about them. We consider our parents often more unique than or our siblings, again, because we know so much more about them. And if you get to know somebody, then they become more unique than other people. You know, my friends are really more unique than other people's friends, you know, or they're more special, or I'm closer to them. And it really, I believe, depends all on how much information we have about them and how important they are in our lives.
Okay, cool. Confirmation bias. One of the most important cognitive biases is confirmation bias, which is the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information that confirms or supports your prior beliefs. Like all cognitive biases, confirmation bias serves an important function. For instance, one of the most reliable forms of confirmation bias is the belief in our shared reality. Suppose it is raining. When you first hear the patter of raindrops on your roof or window, you may think it is raining. You then look for additional signs to confirm your conclusion, and when you look out of the window, you see rain falling and puddles of water accumulating. Most likely you will not be looking for irrelevant or contradictory information. You will be looking for information that confirms your belief that is raining. Thus, you can see how confirmation bias, based on the idea that the world does not change dramatically over time, is an important tool for navigating in our environment. I don't think this is what confirmation bias is. Or maybe, I don't know. Unfortunately, as with most heuristics, we tend to apply this sort of thinking inappropriately. One example that has recently received a lot of attention is the way in which confirmation bias has increased political polarization. When searching for information on the internet about an event or topic, most people look for information that confirms their prior beliefs rather than what undercuts them. The pervasive presence of social media in our lives is exacerbating the effects of confirmation bias, since the computer algorithms used by social media platforms steer people toward content that reinforces their current beliefs and predispositions. These multimedia tools are especially problematic when our beliefs are incorrect. For example, they contradict scientific knowledge, or antisocial. For example, they support violent or illegal behavior. Thus, social media and the internet have created a situation in which confirmation bias can be turbocharged in ways that are destructive for society. Confirmation bias is a result of the brain's limited ability to process information. Is it? Is a result of the brain's limited ability to process information. Maybe, but I'm not sure. Peter Wason conducted early experiments identifying this kind of bias. He asked subjects to identify the rule that applies to a sequence of numbers, for instance 2, 4, 8. Subjects were told to generate examples to test their hypothesis. Multiply the previous number by 2. Maybe. Probably. Most likely. Indeed. See how I'm confirming? confirming my thesis. Subjects were told to generate examples to test the hypothesis. What he found is that once the subject settled on a particular hypothesis, they were much more likely to select examples that confirmed their hypothesis rather than negated it. What could possibly negate the next number being 16? 2, 4, 8, 16. What other sequence could there be? Oh, couldn't it be powers of 2? 2 power 2, 2 power 1, 2 by 2 equals 2, 2 by 2 by 2 equals 4, 2 by 2 by 2 by 2, equals 16, it's still 16. Powers of 2, or the number is multiplied by itself. By 2, sorry. It's multiplied by 2. Rather than negated it. As a result, they were unable to identify the real rule, any ascending sequence of numbers, and failed to falsify their initial assumptions. Falsification is an important tool in the scientist's toolkit when they are testing hypotheses, and is an effective way to avoid confirmation of bias. I don't get it. What do they mean identify the real rule and any ascending sequence of numbers? Oh! It could be. Any ascending sequence of numbers. Okay. Or maybe not okay. I'm not sure. I understand. In philosophy, you will be presented with different arguments on issues such as the nature of the mind or the best way to act in a given situation. You should take your time to reason through these issues carefully and consider alternative views. What you believe to be the case may be right, but you may also fall into the trap of confirmation bias, seeing confirming evidence as better and more convincing than evidence that calls your beliefs into question. Anchoring bias. Confirmation bias is closely related to another bias known as anchoring. Anchoring bias refers to our tendency to rely on initial values, prices, or quantities when estimating the actual value, price, or quantity of something. How? If you are presented with a quantity, even if that number is clearly arbitrary, you will have a hard discounting it in your subsequent calculation. The initial value anchors subsequent estimates. For instance, Tversky and Kahneman reported an experiment in which subjects were asked to estimate the number of African nations in the United Nations. First, the experiment, how much do you think? I would estimate it as 30, around 30. No, that's too little. Let's say 40. Or 45. For instance, estimate the number of African nations in the United Nations. I think 40, around 40. More than 40. First, the experimenter spun a wheel of fortune in front of the subjects that produced a random number between 0 and 100. Let's say the wheel landed in 79. Subjects were asked whether the number of nations was higher or lower than the random number. Subjects were then asked to estimate the real number of nations. Even though the initial anchoring value was random, people in the study found it difficult to deviate far from that number. For subjects receiving an initial value of 10, the median estimate of nations was 25, while for subjects receiving an initial value of 65, the median estimate was 45. In the same paper, Tversky, what's the real number then? Tell me! The number of African nations. The number of African countries. 54. Yeah, it was close. Not far. Or 45 is close. In the same paper, Tversky and Kahneman described the way that anchoring bias interferes with statistical reasoning. In a number of scenarios, subjects made irrational judgments about statistics because of the way the question was phrased. One minute or 2 minutes, and I come back. where were we? In the same paper, Tversky and Kahneman described the way that anchoring bias interferes with statistical reasoning. In a number of scenarios, subjects made rational judgments about statistics because of the way the question was phrased. They were tricked when an anchor was inserted into the question. Instead of expending the cognitive energy needed to solve the statistical problem, subjects were much more likely to go with their gut or think intuitively. That type of reasoning generates anchoring bias. When you do philosophy, you will be confronted with some formal and abstract problems that will challenge you to engage in thinking that feels difficult and unnatural. Resist the urge to latch on the first thought that jumps into your head or to your tradition, and try to think the problem through with all the cognitive resources at your disposal. Availability heuristic. The availability heuristic refers to the tendency to evaluate new information based on the most recent or most easily recalled examples. The availability heuristic occurs when people take easily remembered instances as being more representative than they objectively are, based on statistical probabilities. In very simple situations, the availability of instances is a good guide to judgments. Suppose you are wondering whether you should plan for rain. It may make sense to anticipate rain if it has been raining a lot in the last few days, since weather patterns tend to linger in most climates. More generally, scenarios that are well known to us. I have not seen rain for a month, perhaps even a year. Rain is very rare in Egypt. That's why when I went to Europe once, I was really enjoying rain. I really like rain. We Muslims generally like rain because we consider it to be a gift from God. But perhaps people take it for granted in countries that have a lot of rain. More generally, scenarios that are well known to us, dramatic, recent, or easy to imagine, are more available for retrieval from memory. Therefore, if we easily remember an instance or scenario, we may incorrectly think that the chances are high that the scenario will be repeated. For instance, people in the United States estimate the probability of dying by violent crime or terrorism much more highly than they ought to. In fact, these are extremely rare occurrences compared to death by heart disease, cancer, or car accidents. But stories of violent crime and terrorism are prominent in the news media and fiction. Because these vivid stories are dramatic and easily recalled, we have a skewed view of how frequently violent crime occurs. Tribalism. Another loosely defined category of cognitive bias is the tendency of human beings to align themselves with groups with whom they share values and practices. The tendency towards tribalism is an evolutionary advantage for social creatures like human beings. By forming groups to share knowledge and distribute work, we are much more likely to survive. Not surprisingly, human beings with pro-social behaviors persist in the population at higher rates than human beings with antisocial tendencies. Pro-social behaviors, however, go beyond wanting to communicate and align ourselves with other human beings. We also tend to see outsiders as a threat. As a result, tribalistic tendencies both reinforce allegiances among in-group members and increase animosity toward out-group members. Tribal thinking makes it hard for us to objectively evaluate information that either aligns with or contradicts the beliefs held by our group or tribe. This effect can be demonstrated even when in-group membership is not real or is based on some superficial feature of the person, for instance the way they look or an article of clothing they are wearing. A related bias is called the bandwagon fallacy. The bandwagon fallacy can lead you to conclude that you ought to do something or believe something because many other people do or believe the same thing. While other people can provide guidance, they are not always reliable. Furthermore, just because many people believe something doesn't make it true. Watch the video below to improve your tribal literacy and understand the dangers of this type of thinking. The dangers of tribalism. Kevin Delaplante. It's 11 minutes.
Hi, I'm Kevin Delaplante, and this is the first in a series of sketchbook videos that I'm doing on tribalism and critical thinking. I believe that critical thinking in the 21st century demands a certain level of what I would call tribal literacy in order to understand what's going on in the world around us and ourselves, why we react to events the way we do, how we relate to other people. We need to understand how our tribal psychology influences the way we think and feel and make judgments. In this first video, I'm going to introduce some key definitions and talk about how polarization brings out the dark side, the dangerous side of tribalism. So, what is tribalism? We'll start with what is a tribe. Basically, a tribe is a group of people that feel connected to each other in a meaningful way because they share something in common that matters to them. The connection can be based on just about anything: kinship, ethnicity, religion, language, culture, ideology, favorite sports team, whatever. What matters is that this connection binds individuals into a group that allows them to make a distinction between us, members of the group, and them, those who are not members of the group. Now, when we talk about tribalism, what we're really talking about is a pattern of attitudes and behaviors that human beings tend to adopt when we come to identify with our tribes. In a nutshell, we use the us-them distinction, defined by tribal boundaries, to make normative judgments. We're good, they're bad. We're right, they're wrong. We're worthy, they're unworthy. We're rational, they're irrational. Our beliefs are true, their beliefs are false. And these judgments support behaviors, how we act, what we say, how we respond, and so on. In other words, our moral psychology is very groupish. It follows the contours of our group affiliations. And it's not just our moral psychology. Our judgments about what's reasonable or unreasonable to believe, what arguments are persuasive, what sources are trustworthy, also follows the contours of our group affiliations. These are judgments about the character of our beliefs and our knowledge, what philosophers call epistemological judgments. If you're not familiar with this term, epistemology is the name for the branch of philosophy that studies knowledge. Epistemological is the adjectival form. It's a long word, it has 7 syllables, so people sometimes use the shorter term epistemic as the adjectival form, and these mean the same thing. An epistemic judgment is an epistemological judgment. They both mean that it's a judgment about what counts as knowledge or justified belief or how we come to have knowledge. So to parallel the claim that our moral psychology is groupish, we can say that our epistemic psychology is also groupish. And what's key is that these two kinds of groupishness are closely connected, at least in our psychology. If we're doing straight philosophy, we might have good reason to keep these two domains distinct, to not confound moral issues and epistemological issues. But if we're trying to understand human behavior, trying to figure out how human beings actually form judgments and make decisions, it turns out that we can't separate our moral psychology from our epistemic psychology. They both emerge from the same cognitive system. So our tribal psychology is both a moral psychology and an epistemic psychology. So that's tribalism. Now I want to note that tribalism per se isn't dangerous. I think it's clear that the dangers of tribalism are driven by polarization. So, what's polarization? Polarization is a measure of the magnitude of the differences between groups. These differences can be almost anything: physical traits, psychological traits, social traits, attitudes, and behaviors. Polarization measures how large or strong those differences are. I'm interested in polarization as it relates to how we make moral judgments and how we make epistemic judgments. And in that case, perceived differences can be just as important as actual differences. Two groups may actually be more similar than they think, but if they perceive each other as more different, that can be enough to drive the attitudes and behaviors that characterize tribalism. Now, there's an obvious dark side to polarization. It's not hard to see how increasing polarization in our tribal psychology can lead to serious social and political problems and a distorted perception of the world. Here are two groups that are intermixed. They live and work together. I've drawn one as lighter green and the other as darker green. Let's assume that they disagree on some fundamental principles. They could be liberals and conservatives, Protestants and Catholics, vegetarians and non-vegetarians. It doesn't really matter. What matters is the character of the disagreement. How disagreement is interpreted and managed. On the right, I've got a polarization meter. It indicates how polarized these groups are. If it's in the green, as it is here, that's a lower level of polarization. With lower levels of polarization, all other things being equal, there's more tolerance for disagreement. We recognize that in spite of our differences, there's still a great deal of common ground between us. And we can use that common ground as a basis for constructing a social space where we can live and work together peacefully. Our differences don't prevent us from being respectful and even friendly to one another. I see you as holding different views from me on some issues, and I may disagree with your reasons, but I never question your capacity to reason or your entitlement to be treated like a human being worthy of respect and dignity. Now, as we ratchet up the polarization, it becomes increasingly difficult to manage these disagreements. With increasing polarization, we end up disagreeing on more things, and we disagree more strongly. We care more about the issues on which we disagree, and it becomes harder to accept disagreement as something we should just expect among reasonable people. It becomes harder for me to accept that your disagreement isn't a sign of a deeper flaw in your moral character or a deeper flaw in your capacity to see reality for what it is. As polarization increases, common ground decreases, which I'm visualizing here in terms of the degree of overlap and mixing in these groups. At the top, there's a lot of common ground and polarization is low. As you move down, our polarization meter runs into the yellow and it starts to become more challenging. At the bottom, polarization is in the red. It's becoming harder and harder to identify areas of agreement that we can use as a basis for adjudicating or negotiating differences in opinion. We interpret more of our differences as a reflection of incompatible worldviews. And then we hit a point where we feel an urge to separate. Peaceful coexistence between us seems impossible, and our instinct is to adapt by segregating, carving out social and political spaces where we don't have to interact with the other group, where we can enjoy the comforts of social interaction with our own kind, and the very real psychological benefits of unity and solidarity and the feeling of being a part of a collective identity. When this happens, polarization within each group drops back down to lower levels. Now, this may not sound so bad, but unfortunately, what often happens is that these very real psychological benefits are bought at a cost to our relationships with other groups. In-group solidarity tends to go up when the outgroup, the group outside of us, is perceived in a negative light, as a dangerous other, as a threat to the unity and stability of our group. That threat is experienced as a kind of social pressure from the outside, and that pressure gets converted into social capital on the inside, our capacity to organize ourselves and engage in coordinated social action as a group for the benefit of the group, which can feel awesome and be very pleasant on the inside. But in our relations with other groups, it can lead to the worst behaviors of which human beings are capable: prejudice, discrimination, violence, atrocity, genocide. And even if we don't get to the point of violence, if our laws and institutions are strong enough to prevent that, we're still left with a public culture where our in-group, out-group relationships are dominated by suspicion, hostility, and fear. And another casualty of extreme polarization is epistemic, when we cut ourselves off from other points of view and only look to our tribe for guidance on what to believe and who to trust. We run the risk of erecting a system of beliefs that is increasingly unmoored from reality. The moral and political bubble that we've built for ourselves is also an epistemic bubble. Everyone outside the bubble is biased or lying or irrational or otherwise untrustworthy. And this is obviously a disaster for critical thinking. I think it's also obvious that our public culture is drifting in this direction. And in some areas, like our public political discourse, it has become toxic. The first lesson I would draw from this is that the problem isn't our tribal psychology per se. low to moderate levels of polarization can be very good for us. We get the benefits of community and belonging and group solidarity without the disruption and risks that come with higher levels of polarization. The real problem is polarization and the forces that are responsible for driving us in the direction of increasing polarization. Now, in this respect, our tribal psychology is part of the problem because some of the forces that drive polarization do have roots in our psychology. There are feedback loops that can be triggered that contribute to the escalation. But they're not the only forces. There are external social forces that are in play as well, like orchestrated persuasion campaigns and persuasion technologies created by governments and corporations that are designed to exploit these feedback loops, to exploit the mechanisms that feed polarization. And there are broader social trends in technology and lifestyle and geopolitical tensions that I think exacerbate the problem. In the other videos in this series, my plan is to shine a light on this problem from a number of different perspectives. I think we need to understand all of these issues better if we're going to have a productive conversation about what we want to do about this situation. Hey, thanks for watching. When I was a university teacher, I used to draw a lot in the classroom, and I find that I really miss that experience, so this was a lot of fun for me. If you would like to learn more about the research that informed this video...
Okay. Sunk cost fallacy. Sunk costs refer to the time, energy, money, or other costs that have been paid in the past. Sunk costs refer to the time, energy, money, or other costs that have been paid in the past. These costs are sunk because they cannot be recovered. The sunk cost fallacy is thinking that attaches a value to things in which you have already invested resources that is greater than the value of those things have today. Human beings have a natural tendency to hang on. Let me write something that I have just remembered and don't want to forget. Sorry. Something they want to do later. Okay. The sunk cost fallacy is thinking that attaches a value to... Okay. Human beings have a natural tendency to hang on whatever they invest in and are loath to give something up. One moment. Just fixing something. Human beings have a natural tendency to hang on to and loathe to give something up even after it has been proven to be a liability. For example, a person may have sunk a lot of money. May have sunk a lot of money into a business over time, and the business may clearly be failing. Nonetheless, the business person will be reluctant to close shop or sell the business because of the time, money, and emotional energy they have spent on the venture. This is the behavior of throwing good money after bad by continuing to irrationally invest in something that has lost its worth because of emotional attachment to the failed enterprise. People will engage in this kind of behavior in all kinds of situations and may continue a friendship, a job, or a marriage for the same reason. They don't want to lose their investment even when they are clearly headed for failure or ought to cut their losses. People will engage in this kind of behavior in all kinds of situations and may continue a friendship, a job, or a marriage for the same reason. They don't want to lose their investment even when they are clearly headed for failure or ought to cut their losses. A similar type of faulty reasoning leads to the gambler's fallacy, in which a person reasons that future chance events will be more likely if they have not happened recently. What? In which a person reasons that future chance events will be more likely if they have not happened recently. For instance, if I flip a coin many times in a row, I may get a string of heads, but even if I flip several heads in a row, that does not make it more likely I will flip tails on the next coin flip. Each coin flip is statistically independent, and there is an equal chance of turning up heads or tails. The gambler, like the reasoner from sunk costs, is tied to the past when they should be reasoning about the present and future. There are important social and evolutionary purposes for past-looking thinking. Sunk cost thinking keeps parents engaged in the growth and development of their children after they are born. Sunk cost thinking builds loyalty and affection among friends and family. More generally, a commitment to sunk costs encourages us to engage in long-term projects, and this type of thinking has the evolutionary purpose of fostering culture and community. Nevertheless, it is important to periodically re-evaluate our investments in both people and things. In recent ethical scholarship, there is some debate about how to assess the sunk costs of moral decisions. In recent scholarship, there is some debate about how to assess the sunk costs of moral decisions. Consider the case of war. Just war theory dictates that wars may be justified in cases where the harm imposed on the adversary is proportional to the good gained by the act of defense or deterrence. It may be that at the start of the war those costs seem proportional, but after the war has dragged on for some time, it may seem that the objective cannot be obtained without a greater quantity of harm than had been initially imagined. Should the evaluation of whether war is justified estimate the total amount of harm done or prospective harm that will be done going forward? Such questions do not have easy answers. I don't get it. And how does this has to do with anything? There is a debate among how to assess the sunk costs of moral decisions. Consider the case of war. Just war theory dictates that wars may be justified in cases where the harm imposed on the adversary is proportional to the good gained by the act of defense or deterrence. It may be that at the start of the war, those costs seemed proportional, but after the war has dragged on for some time, it may seem that the objective cannot be obtained without a greater quantity of harm than had been initially imagined. Should the evaluation of whether a war is justified estimate the total amount? Should the evaluation of whether a war is justified estimate the total amount of harm done or prospective harm that will be done? Should the evaluation of whether a war is justified estimate the total amount of harm done or prospective harm that will be done going forward? Should the evaluation of whether a war is justified estimate the total amount of harm done or prospective harm that will be done going forward? Like what? Like what? They have not clarified enough. Not a problem. Summarizes these common cognition. Table 2.1 summarizes these common cognition biases. Should we read them or pass them over? Let's read them quickly, why not? Confirmation bias, the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information that confirms or supports prior beliefs. As part of the morning routine, a person scans news headlines on the internet and chooses to read only those stories that confirm views they already hold. Anchoring bias, the tendency to rely on initial values, prices, or quantities when estimating the actual value, price, or quantity of something. When supplied with a random number and then asked to provide a number estimate in response to a question, people supply a number close to the random number they were initially given. Availability heuristic, the tendency to evaluate new information based on the most recent or most easily recalled examples. The tendency to evaluate new information based on the most recent, most easily recalled examples. People in the United States overestimate the probability of dying in criminal attack, since these types of stories are easily to vividly recall. Tribalism, the tendency for human beings to align themselves with the groups with whom they share values and practices. People with a strong commitment to one political party often struggle to objectively evaluate the political positions of those who are members of the opposing party. Bandwagon fallacy, the tendency to do something or believe something because many other people do or believe the same thing. Advertisers often rely on the bandwagon fallacy, attempting to create the impression that everyone is buying a new product in order to inspire others to buy it. Sunk cost fallacy, the tendency to attach a value to things in which resources have been invested that is greater than the value of those things actually have. A business person continues to invest money in a failing venture, throwing good money after bad money. Gambler's fallacy, the tendency to reason that future chance events will be more likely if they have not happened recently. Someone who regularly buys lottery tickets reasons that they are due to win since they haven't won once in 20 years. Common cognitive biases. Think like a philosopher. This is the last part, okay? As we have seen, cognitive biases are built into the way human beings process information. They are common to us all, and it takes self-awareness and effort to overcome the tendency to fall back on biases. This needs exercises and more examples in order to overcome. Consider a time when you have fallen prey to one of the 5 cognitive biases described above. What were the circumstances? Recall your thought process. Were you aware at the time that your thinking was misguided? What were the consequences of succumbing to that cognitive bias? I think when we thought about how many African countries, because I chose 30 at the beginning, I didn't go to, when I went to, it's 54, right? I did not go to 54 because it was very far from 30. Even though it was a reasonable number. My thought process. Recall your thought process. Were you aware at the time that your thinking was misguided? No, not of course not. What were consequences of succumbing to the cognitive bias that I have dismissed being 40, the number 40 and 45, dismissed the number 50, sorry, because it shows number 30. Write a short paragraph describing how that cognitive bias allowed you to make a decision you now realize was irrational. Then write a second paragraph describing how with the benefit of time and distance you would have thought differently about the incidents that triggered the bias. Use the tools of critical reflection and metacognition to improve your approach to the situation. What might have been the consequence of behaving differently? Finally, write a short conclusion describing what lesson you take from reflecting back on this experience. Does it help you to understand yourself better? Will you be able to act differently in the future? What steps can you take to avoid cognitive biases in your thinking today? Let's open a new tab. Google Docs. Let's do the exercise. Blank document. Let's copy this, paste it here. No. Paste, how do I paste? Paste without formatting, yes. Let's consider another confirmation bias that I have fell into. That's right. Yesterday, I disagreed with my mother on the meaning of the word voila. Why did it stop? Continue, my friend. She suggested that it means love, while I suggested means seeking someone in fear. When I searched for its meaning, it meant sadness. primary meaning was sadness. But I dismissed this result, searched further until I found the one that says means fear. My thought process was escaping. I was mainly thinking about avoiding embarrassment of being wrong. The embarrassment of being wrong. This is, I was somewhat aware that my thinking was misguided. The consequence is that the appropriate meaning was not communicated or found. Now, I would have said correct answer. Correct answer. And explain that it has a secondary meaning. Use the tools of critical reflection and metacognition to improve your approach to this situation. Let's search on the meaning of wala. Where is wala? it is. Translate. A sound root that indicates the confusion of something and its disappearance. It is said a man is infatuated. What does infatuated mean? Possessed with intense, short love or admiration for someone. Love meaning love. Where is the let's skip and the woman is infatuated so she came in a situation of infatuation, believed in her. Everyone was amazed by her and everyone gathered around her. How about ذهل? This is walaha. How about ذهل? Because when I suggested that it meant ذهل. Does ذهل means confusion too? Or amazement? Preoccupation with something due to panic or something else. Okay, how about the traditional definition? Sadness, confusion, seeking in fear, seeking in love, speeding is walaha, and there is waliha. Is there a difference between walaha and waliha? Walaha and waliha. There's a difference. It has the main meaning. Wala also means حزن شديد, extreme sadness and extreme love. So it pretty much means three things. Mom was correct and I was correct, and sadness is correct as well. The result would have been more nuanced understanding of the word. So the word waliya or walaha primarily means moving towards something, or it has the meaning of movement, and it either means coming back and forth or disturbance, yes, disturbance, something that's disturbed, moving back and forth, or going just forth, something. And it is used metaphorically. It is used for going towards someone in fear, seeking someone in fear, seeking someone in love, or having disturbed state from fear, from love, or sadness, or the third meaning confusion. Okay, I will tell Mom when she comes back from work. This nice information. There is here. Hello. وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. ازيك يا أخ ثائر؟ كنت بشوف دلوقتي معنى ولها. ولها معناها ذهب أو اضطرب، بسبب بقى الخوف أو الحزن أو الحب. هل محتوى القناة أصبح إنجليزيا بالكامل؟ لا، مش بالكامل، يعني هيبقى فيه تنوع، يعني ساعات إنجليزي وساعات عربي كده. So we have finished. Now we are in section 3, developing good habits of mind. Okay guys, we end the video here and see you later. Goodbye.